Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most mind-blowing strategic and cultural shifts in military history. We're talking about how the Mongol Empire, yeah, the guys famous for riding horses across the steppes, managed to conquer the incredibly advanced, deeply entrenched Song Dynasty of China. We're going to break down the tactics, the wild engineering, and the really dramatic leadership choices that brought a total end to an era. Okay, let's dive right into this massive historical puzzle. Because, this isn't just a story about military tech. It's really about how human adaptability and leadership ultimately define destiny. So, on his deathbed, Genghis Khan gave his successors one huge objective: finish conquering China. His grandson, Kublai Khan, was absolutely determined to fulfill that dying wish. But they hit a literal massive roadblock. To conquer the southern Song Dynasty, the Mongols had to figure out how to get past the Yangtze River, which is incredibly wide, and a formidable, seemingly unbreakable wall of naval ships.
Section 1. The Water Barrier, Mongols versus Song.
To really get a feel for the scale of this challenge, we have to look at how completely, fundamentally opposite these two military powers were. Look at the stark cultural clash here. On one side, you have the Mongols, the undisputed masters of the horse. Culturally, they actually hated boats. To a Mongol warrior, a boat was basically just a woman's cart, a floating wagon, really. If they needed to cross a river, they preferred a totally organic method, like literally riding across on a blown-up goatskin. But then, on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you've got the Song Dynasty, who relied almost entirely on water for their survival. They essentially had this massive, floating wall of advanced ships acting as their primary defense mechanism. So you have to ask yourself, how do you even begin to bridge that gap?
Section 2. Engineering a Mongol Navy. Aju strategy.
Overcoming this geographical boss level required a massive shift in mindset, and this was spearheaded by a really innovative Mongol general named Iju. Let's trace how his strategic genius actually developed. It all started down in northern Vietnam, fighting the Dai Viet people. Iju is watching his father's forces brilliantly rout enemy war elephants using flaming arrows. Huge success, right? But there was a catch. The Mongol soldiers completely ignored orders to burn the enemy's boats because, remember, they thought boats were just silly floating carts. That mistake allowed the Dai Viet forces to escape by water and evacuate their capital. The Mongols won the battles but literally lost the war because they didn't control the water. Iju saw this and realized, okay, we have to adapt. He systematically studied the Yangtze River and its defenses, which directly led to his next brilliant move, bringing in these top-tier Persian engineers from the Ilkhanate to build something the world hadn't quite seen before.
And that brings us to this absolute game-changer of an invention: the ship-mounted trebuchet. These Persian engineers basically took massive, heavy catapults, stuff normally used on solid, stable ground, and figured out how to adapt them for the rocking, totally unstable deck of a boat. They could launch heavy projectiles and even incendiary bombs from the water. Suddenly, this engineering marvel allowed a group of people who were deeply uncomfortable with water to wield a devastating weapon on the rivers. To the Mongols, the ship wasn't a woman's cart anymore. It was basically a giant floating bow and arrow.
And this right here perfectly illustrates why Aju's plan was so devastating. See, the Song Dynasty had been anticipating land invasions for centuries, so the land-facing walls of their cities were incredibly thick and heavily fortified. But they just assumed their ships would always protect them on the riverside. So their water-facing city walls were actually quite weak. The Mongols took their brand-new ship-mounted trebuchets, sailed right up to the vulnerable side of these fortresses, and just relentlessly blasted them, toppling city after city all the way down the Yangtze.
Section 3. The Japanese detour. Kublai Khan's move.
Right as the Mongols were making major headway toward the Song capital of Hangzhou, Kublai Khan makes a move that seems kind of confusing at first. He orders a massive naval invasion of Japan. While fighting the samurai might look like a total distraction, Kublai Khan actually had highly calculated reasons for it. The Song dynasty had lost northern China, meaning they were getting their vital sulfur, the absolute key ingredient for their gunpowder, imported from Japan. By attacking Japan, Kublai aimed to sever that sulfur supply, shut down regional maritime trade, and guarantee that the Song dynasty couldn't just sail across the sea to seek refuge. Plus, there's the classic strategy of kill the chicken to scare the monkey. Basically, intimidating southern China by showing them the Mongols could strike all the way across the ocean.
Now, full disclosure, fighting the samurai was a tactical disaster for the Mongols. They had bad ships, they faced terrible weather, and they just honestly didn't quite know what they were doing with a massive naval invasion yet. But strategically, it was actually a huge win. Even though they didn't conquer Japan, the Mongols gained vital ocean experience and essentially threw a complete blockade around the Song dynasty. They ruled the ocean, choked off the trade, and really just tightened the noose around southern China.
Section 4. Mercy at the capital. Bayan takes command.
As the Mongol forces, now led by this really sophisticated cosmopolitan commander named Bayan, finally closed in on the capital, a stark, almost unbelievable contrast in leadership emerged. What you should really take away from this is the dramatic role reversal. Kublai Khan had completely scrapped his grandfather's old policy of total destruction. Instead, he promoted mercy. He actively wanted to incorporate skilled artisans, shipbuilders, and defectors into his empire. And because of this, brilliant minds were actually flocking to the Mongols. Meanwhile, the Song generals? They acted as absolute cowards. They literally loaded up boats with stolen jewels, abandoned their own soldiers, and even left their own families behind just to flee the incoming army.
So, with the corrupt generals gone, the person left holding the pieces of the mighty Song Dynasty was the Dowager Empress Xie. Now, she was elderly, she only had one eye, and the defectors constantly mocked her behind her back. Yet, she was the only one who actually stepped up to lead. She looked at the situation and pragmatically chose to offer the Mongols a complete, total surrender, rather than see the capital city and its people burned to the ground.
And this moment perfectly captures the respect and discipline of the Mongol command at this stage. When the Empress invited General Bayan into the palace to accept the surrender, he refused with this incredibly powerful quote. He demanded a public surrender, out of pure respect for his troops' hard work on the battlefield. But importantly, Bayan stayed totally true to Kublai's new policy. He treated the Empress with respect. There was no wholesale looting, no massive slaughter in the streets. The Empress and the child emperor bowed toward Beijing, and Kublai Khan actually gave them palaces and titles, proving to the world that his merciful approach was real.
Section 5. The tragic final stand. The end of an era.
But unfortunately, the story doesn't end with a neat, peaceful surrender. Because those cowardly generals who fled, they weren't done yet. They grabbed another young half-brother of the emperor, crowned him, and tried to set up a rogue floating court down south. Let's look at how this timeline unfolds down at the Pearl River Delta. On day 1, the Song forces revert to their old tricks, chaining all their boats together to build a massive wall of the sea. But the Mongols have adapted beautifully by now. By day 5, they just bypass the water wall entirely and capture all the surrounding high ground on land. By day 10, they cut off the Song's access to fresh wood and water. And by day 15, trapped on their boats and unable to even boil rice, the Song soldiers are forced to drink seawater, becoming gravely ill. It's just a complete, devastating tactical checkmate.
And trapped inside this doomed floating fortress is the newly crowned emperor, Bing. He's just a 7-year-old boy. As the mighty Song Dynasty literally collapses around him, this little boy's only remaining comfort, his only possession in the entire world, is a pet parrot. It's such a deeply human, incredibly tragic image right in the dead center of this massive military blockade.
The Mongols are holding literally all the cards here, and they repeatedly offer a peaceful, completely safe surrender. But the Song Prime Minister, a man who, mind you, had already fled the capital and abandoned his duties earlier, stubbornly refuses. He declared that he absolutely would not disgrace his country by letting the Mongols capture the emperor. He essentially prioritized this twisted sense of national pride over the actual lives of his remaining people.
Which brings us to this horrific, grim final sequence of events. In a totally desperate final act, Step 1, the Prime Minister actually throws his own wife and children into the ocean to drown. Step 2, he grabs the 7-year-old Emperor Bing and plunges into the sea with him. And Step 3, amidst all this terrible chaos, the cage with the little emperor's pet parrot falls into the water and the bird dies alongside them. And that is exactly how one of the most technologically and artistically advanced dynasties in the history of the world comes to a tragic end.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this to think about. Historians still debate whether Empress Xie's total surrender or the Prime Minister's murder-suicide was the ultimate betrayal of the country. But we have to ask ourselves, when a mighty empire falls, is it just some cosmic inevitability? Like, did they lose the mandate of heaven because their institutions grew too stale and corrupt? Or is it the direct, incredibly tragic result of the very human people at the helm making terribly flawed, cowardly